Who said that? Business presentations need to be boring and take a lot of time. Be lean. Tell a story.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to join us. It's great to see many of you joining us today. I'm Laura. I'm part of marketing team here in MLC, and I'll be your host for today's talk. Before we officially begin, let's take a moment to warm things up and make sure everything is working properly. So please say hello in the chat and tell us where you're joining from today, where are you connecting from. We always love to see how global these sessions can be, and this also helps us to confirm that the chat is working well. Hello from Brazil, okay, from Milan, Luxembourg, Los Angeles, okay. So this is a very global session, I would say. Okay. And just a quick note about the chat, feel free to use it throughout the session because there you can share comments or questions at any time. And don't worry if we don't answer to them immediately, because we will dedicate some time for a little Q&A session at the end of this talk. Also, a small reminder before we move on. As always in our webinar, for those who will stay with us until the very end, we prepare some exclusive resources connected to today's topic, of course. And so stay with us until the very end and prepare your phone to scan the QR code. Now, before into today's conversation, let me briefly introduce MLC and who we are. This is our team. And at MLC, we focus on one main thing, I would say, helping people communicate better and more effectively with their presentations. And we do this in three main ways. With design part, helping corporates creating clear and impactful presentations, through our training programs as well, helping teams develop strong visual communication skills, and also we develop some useful features to make presentation creation faster, and with our MLC Aldino, of course. And all of this is built on our core approach, which is the lean presentation design methodology developed by Maurizio La Cava, who also added an important new piece to this approach by writing Presenting Data, a book entirely dedicated to working with data in presentation. And this is exactly why today's topic is so important for us. Because when we started thinking about organizing a new talk focused on presenting data, one name came immediately to our mind. Because if there's one person who contributed so much helping professionals work and communicate with data and numbers, that person is Cole. She is the author of Storytelling with Data and her most recent book, Before and After, books that have become a true reference point for anyone who works with data. That's why having her here today with us is really special. And bringing Maurizio and Cole together means connecting two deeply aligned perspectives on how data should be presented and on how data should be understood. But I won't say anymore. Let me now invite Maurizio on the stage to join us and kick off today's session on the art of data storytelling. Maurizio, over to you.
Ciao Laura, hello everybody. Thank you guys for joining the session. Today is a very special session because we have a very special guest.
Yes.
Her name is Cole, and she's going to join us in a second. I know Cole is already here, so Cole, please feel free to join the stage. We're going to spotlight you. So guys, quick technical points before we start our conversation. Today is going to be very pragmatical. You know, I like to talk about the actual contents. I like to ask concrete questions. Cole has written very important books on data storytelling. They inspired my work, and the methodologies that she produced are very relevant to today's data storytelling projects. I think we have a lot to learn from her. So I prepared tons of questions. I hope we will have time to go through all of them. In the meantime, of course, let's make it interactive. So if you want to join me asking questions to Cole, please feel free to use the chat. I see you know how to use it. So feel free to write your comments, or if you have any questions, please join us. Ciao, Cole. I can see you. It's very nice to meet you live and almost in person. Welcome to join.
Yes. Second best, only to in person. Nice to be here, Maurizio.
Very, very nice to connect with you today. We have plenty of people who can't wait to meet you, to learn from you, and especially from all your books and your latest book, which I just finished reading. And I have it here. It's been with me for a couple of weeks now, and I love it. So we have plenty of questions, but before, guys, let's get started and let's meet Cole. So Cole, would you like to tell us a little about yourself, who you are? We all know you have an amazing background because your story tells about the background of Google Analytics. So it started in data in the corporate world, in a very innovative world. And then I know that you started teaching and sharing best practices. And I think you gathered many insights on how important it is to learn how to communicate with data. But over to you, so I'm listening.
Yes, absolutely. And you have all your facts straight. So my name's Cole. I run a company called Storytelling with Data, where we think of what we do as teaching people to communicate with graphs and numbers in a way that makes sense and is easy to understand, and really going beyond the graph to thinking about how do we not just show data, but really weave it into a story that's going to get our audience's attention and build their understanding and ultimately drive them to act or make a decision in a smarter way. And now, just rewinding my background, I've always been drawn to math. I love the logic of it. My undergrad is in math, but also the practicality of how do you take numbers and make them something that is meaningful to somebody else. And so that was when the business piece came in. So scholastically, I have a math degree and a business degree. My career started in banking, so a lot of data there. And that was where I really started to understand how technical people and non-technical people tend to speak different languages, and how you can help them translate so that they can talk openly and in a way that makes sense to one another. And I learned relatively early on that making data visual, making a graph or a picture out of the information, is a fantastic way to do so when it's done well. And so the right graph or a good graph for the information can create this aha moment of understanding it that is so gratifying to watch when you've been a part of helping make that happen. So I spent a number of years in banking, honing my skills there, both on the deep statistics, analytical side, but then also how do you translate that, as I mentioned, into something that can be used to drive a business decision. From banking, I spent a little bit of time in private equity using those same sorts of skills. And then I found my way to Google and was one of the first members of the people analytics team. And people analytics at Google is a data-driven team that's embedded in the HR, human resources organization, which is called People Operations at Google. And so that was fascinating. One, to be there just at a time where there was so much growth. Also, the team had just been formed. And so every bit of data we were looking at, it was like we were the first ones ever to look at it that way, or it felt that way. So really a pioneering space. And it was interesting to me to see that the same sort of tactics and techniques, both from a hardcore statistical standpoint, but then also a communication standpoint, applied just as well in this totally new space. So while I was at Google, I had the opportunity to build a course on data visualization and teach other people what I'd arrived at through trial and error over time. And that gave me the freedom to pause and read more and do more research to understand why were some things more effective than others, so that I could then subsequently teach that. And so I drew on a lot of the resources that existed at that point, because this was back in 2009, 2010, where the main books were Tufte's series and Stephen Few, Show Me the Numbers. I also read everything that Colin Ware wrote. His is a little more academic, but really focused on visual perception and how that plays into cognition, which I found fascinating. And so I started teaching first at Google, and then eventually spoke at my first conference and realized that in today's world, where everybody is faced with so much data, that the kind of skills that I was teaching and using were not needed by Google alone. Rather, basically anybody in any sort of role who needs to communicate or understand numbers at one point or another can benefit from the sorts of lessons that I was teaching. And so in, let's see, what been 2013, I left Google, started storytelling with data, where, as I mentioned, we think of really what we do as teaching people to communicate effectively with graphs and numbers, and to tell stories with those that get other people's attention and move them to act.
Thank you for sharing, Cole. It is amazing how, looking backwards, all the dots connect from professional background to personal background through real and concrete experience on the field. And what really resonates is the fact that you're saying, it was not relevant only to Google people, but it is clear that it is relevant to, I believe, most of the people who work in corporates, because we use numbers to make ourselves believable. In a way, I often like to say that when we make a presentation, we need to give people two main things: a reason to care and a reason to believe. And very often, when we want ourselves to be believed in business, we use numbers, we use tables, we use charts. However, you said something that really resonated when you said we need, if done properly, or if done well, because when we work in data very often, and this is something I learned from you, there are two phases. There is a phase that you call exploration, and then there is a phase that you call explanation, right? What is the difference between these two phases?
It's a great question. And this is a distinction that we draw, I think, probably in almost every workshop that we teach, which is, on the one hand, you are exploring the data. This is the analytical process. It's where you're digging through things, maybe combining data in different ways, trying to understand what is interesting or noteworthy here, looking for connections or insights. You're trying to confirm or refute hypotheses that you may have. But then once you've done that, you move into explanatory space. And that is where we have something specific that we want to communicate. Usually something specific to somebody specific that we want to communicate. And that distinction is important because I think a lot of the reasons that data communications fail or are more difficult than they need to be is because we're stuck in the exploration space and we're trying to communicate with our exploration of the data rather than set that aside and really think about, because the exploration was for us, right? It was for me, the analyst or the statistician, the data scientist, to understand what is happening here. But then when we need to communicate that to someone else, that's where the translation has to happen. So I set my stuff aside, I take the learnings and I say, okay, now that I know this, how do I help somebody else know it too? And so it may have been complicated statistical techniques and, box plots and, all of the things when we are looking at the data, because as the experts, we know how to interpret those things. What we don't want is to push that interpretation on our audience, because that's really where we have the ability to add value as the ones working with data, is to say, all right, I did all this stuff. We can talk about it if you want to, but really what you need to know is this. And for the part that we use to explain to others, we keep their needs and preferences and biases and all of that in mind. And that helps us design things visually in a totally different way. It even impacts the way that we use language and words. In order to make things accessible to somebody who's not been involved in the analytical process of understanding the data. And it turns out there are some really simple techniques that you can use to help make the graph or the slide or the presentation more easy to digest for someone else, so that they're looking in the right places, so that they're walking away with the understanding that you want to bring, hopefully wanting to act in the way you think they should act. And I know you want to get into some of those specific techniques, which we will.
I'm looking forward to it. It is very important, and it's very interesting when we make the difference between these two phases, in my opinion, because as you said, I believe this is exactly where most people get caught. Let's say they get stuck, right? Because very often what we do is we spend a lot of time crunching the data, making sense out of them to understand the phenomenon. Maybe there is a trend, maybe there is some kind of relationship. And very often what we do, we make use of charts as data visualization tools to better understand, to make sense out of data. Because if I have a big Excel with plenty of numbers, it's difficult for me to see patterns. But when I start plotting them, well, then I see patterns. However, I'm working on the data, I'm into them, I know them very well. And very often what happens is that now that I got them figured out, I copy paste on PowerPoint and I just go with them. I put a few comments on the slide, and then I come on stage and I say, as you can see from my slide, and then you look at people and they look at you like, where do I see
glazed
that?
over, yeah.
And this is something that I think connects to a concept that you explain very well especially in your latest book, which is one of the two biases you talk about in the book. And I think the first one is the curse of knowledge. There is also a second one that is also quite interesting. I believe that is the false confidence.
Yeah.
What do you think? Would you like to share a bit more about them?
Yeah, let's do. So these are both examples of cognitive biases, which are things that if we don't thoughtfully step back and think about, it's easy to move throughout the world and just assume that everybody thinks in the same way that you do. So let's start actually first with false confidence. So false confidence looks something like, I think I'm a rational person. My thoughts and opinions and perception of reality, it's formed by how I experience the world, what I see, what I hear. Other people are also rational, and therefore they should reach the same conclusion that I do, which sounds perfectly logical when you say it like that, but is wrong for so many different reasons, right? We all come to the table with different experiences, and that means we may interpret things in totally different ways. And so to assume that you know something and other people should just do it the same or see the same thing, it's wrong for all of these reasons. I think maybe even more interesting, or maybe it's sneakier, is the curse of knowledge. And these two often go together, which makes them then extremely difficult at times. So the curse of knowledge is just, once you know something, you can't unknow it. And it actually makes it very hard to remember what not knowing it was like. And this is, I think, more than anything, what leads to that scenario that you talked about, where you get on stage and like, all right, here it is. And you've got a dense slide that makes perfect sense to you, but makes no sense to anyone else. And it's for both of these reasons, right? You've become familiar with it because you were the one working with it. So you fully have the curse of knowledge there. But even going back beyond that, you were the one who chose what to dig into and what questions to ask and how to see, quote unquote, the answer. And so you assume everybody else would have done the same. And so these two biases can compound to lead to a place where good communication doesn't happen. Whereas when we step back from this, and I think for me, one of the best ways to try to release yourself of these biases or understand where they might be impeding you is to really think critically about your audience, about the people to whom you are communicating, and recognize that they are different from you in interesting and useful ways. But that means that you need to take explicit steps to make the same information that makes sense to you make sense to them. And I think one thing I've always found interesting is, and I've seen this play out time and time again, particularly among highly technical people, though it may just be because I have so much exposure to highly technical people, where they put up the complicated analysis, and if the audience doesn't get it, that's the audience's fault, right? They're not smart enough, or they don't know enough that this is perfect, and if you don't get it, then that's on you, which is the complete wrong way to look at it from my perspective. If you put up a graph or a slide and it doesn't make sense to someone else, that's on me as the designer of the information. That means I either didn't know, or I didn't take time to take the audience's needs and experiences and understanding into account. And I think where we can recognize that that's a super skill or superpower that we with technical backgrounds, or the people who are working with data, communicating with data, that's a superpower that we can bring to information to actually make it more useful to other people. And then if we're watching out for and then for my audience or my stakeholders, what superpowers are they bringing? And how can I then use our communication to tap into some of that so that everything is better as a result of our communication and what we're discussing and deciding as a result of that, versus this scenario where you actually aren't even able to talk to each other because of some of these biases.
I believe we own the responsibility to our audience. I believe that the moment we start sharing data, talking to them anyway, from the very first moment, we own their time, we own their attention, which, by the way, are two of the scarcest resources of humankind. And we need to make wise and respectful use of them. So if something is not explained the right way, of course, I agree with you. It's on us. The point is that when we, I believe, work on the exploratory phase, we focus on ourselves. But when we move to the explanation phase, that is when we need to change perspective, and we need to realize that we are going to be cursed by knowledge. And therefore, for us, when we plot a slide, it could be the most complicated slide or chart ever created, but we created it. So for us, it looks familiar. Sometimes I like to treat the audiences in a good way, showing a very complicated slide in which I say, okay, what is the key message here? And maybe it's overwhelming with text, with complicated titles, and people struggle to find the key message, but I always say, I see the key message. It takes me a second to see it because I put it there. Point is that the audience are seeing that slide or that chart for the first time. So we need to change perspective, put ourselves in the audience's shoes, and design in a way that is going to be clear to them.
Well, and this is where the things, you know where to look because you made the slide, but there are really simple things we can do to make that just as obvious to your audience. right? Creating visual contrast to make it clear where you want them to look, using words to make it clear why you want them to look there, what you want them to see. And just that combination of things, even if you do nothing else and the slide is the same otherwise, can take something from being really complicated to at least understandable.
There is something you mention in the book as the Wade test, if I'm pronouncing it properly.
Yeah.
I love this concept, and I have like plenty of curiosities about it, but I'm not going to spoil it. I'm going to leave it to you.
So where are your eyes drawn? Alex on my team, one of the co-authors, has shortened that to WAYED, which is the acronym for where are your eyes drawn. And the test is a simple one. It's you take a graph or a slide that you're going to use to communicate, and you can close your eyes or look away. Then you look back at it, just taking note of where your eyes go first, because probably this is where your audience's eyes will go first as well. And this can help you understand, as the designer of the graph or slide, whether you're directing people's attention to where you mean to direct it. Actually, let's do a quick test here, and I'll show this in action. So if I'm small on your screen right now, make me big. It's a blank slide right now, and that's by design. We're going to put everything, make everything empty before we add to it. So in a moment, I'm going to put some information up on this slide, and I just want you to take note of where your eyes go first. All right, so where do your eyes go first here?
I know the example.
Yeah. So
but yes, I would something that really catches my attention is the overlapping of the chart with the black corner down the logo on the down to the right. It's like,
so
why?
These design elements of the slide template. So no, your attention was drawn to somewhere that's not even providing any information. And now I should mention, this example is a special case. It's a dashboard where if the dashboard is being used for exploration, right? If you're meant to go through and really understand how things are across a number of different dimensions, then you actually don't want to draw attention to any one of those, because that's going to then garner more attention than everything else. So if the dashboard is really a monitoring tool, then what we just saw might be fine. If, though, you want to take that dashboard and try to communicate something with it, then we want to think about, it might be the same information we show, but how do we direct people to where we want them to look and to what we want them to see? So let's actually go back to that for a moment. So here's where we started. And if we just take some time to think about what is useful or interesting from this. Right, we still have all the data there. It's a lot to try to parse on a small screen like this. You wouldn't want to present this information. But if it were being sent out as part of an update, we now can see, most things are okay, which is what you expect anytime you're monitoring with dashboard. But we've got this backlog potential issue, which I see through the red on the top right in the title, tied to the bottom left graph, so that we get that connection. Actually, just to illustrate the concept, let's look at a slightly simpler view. So let's do this again. Where do your eyes go first? Here. Maurizio, anywhere? Everywhere? Nowhere? All at once?
I see peaks.
Yeah. So this is where, when we're the one analyzing the information, we can kind of, dig in. We've got our spreadsheet in front of us too, so we can be looking at different things. But if this is something that I want to use to communicate, I can think about, where do I want my audience to look first? What is the most important comparison for them to make? And just by tweaking the design slightly, I can make it very clear where I want my audience to pay their attention. And by virtue of doing so, I make the information easier to digest. So I probably should have started with that simple one and then gone into the crazy dashboard, but this is the idea that can be applied anytime you're communicating visually, whether with data or anything. You just want to think about, where am I directing people's attention? And am I directing it to the most important thing? And sometimes there is a multifaceted story where there might not just be one thing I want to communicate, there might be several things. And then you can think about, if you are live with an audience, how you might cycle through, sometimes even cycling through the same graph with different views, where I'm highlighting just one or a couple of things at a time and really directing my audience's attention as I do so they know exactly where to look as I'm talking.
One thing that really resonates with me is, well, I first of all, I love this concept of the weight test, because like you clearly
easy,
have an
right?
idea.
Kind of fun.
Yeah, it's fun, and you have an idea. You really communicate to people. Watch out, guys, because people might not see what you see, even though the slide is the same. But watch out, because maybe you meant, as you can see, to highlight a message, but maybe you're not highlighting that message really. And this is something that I love. There is also. I think it would be interesting as well to understand how artificial intelligence influences this or helps us to perform this kind of tests. For example, sometimes what I like to do is to ask AI to create heat maps of attention of my charts, and so that I can see, I can bring the weight test like in a place where it's not biased by myself, but I have AI telling me, look, red areas are areas of main attention, green or blue areas are colder, and therefore they have less attention, they will have less attention. Of course, this is statistically based, and we have to interpret data. But I think AI as well can help us in this direction. In both ways, it's interesting because I think this, as a methodology, helps us to put ourselves in the audience shoes. And every audience is different.
Yes.
Every audience is different, and every audience changes the way we communicate.
Well, and that's where, and you've articulated one of the ways that I've found myself integrating AI into my own work, which is as almost a brainstorming partner, or a second set of eyes, if you will, who has a different perspective maybe than I do. Because you are absolutely right that, when we look and say, where's your attention drawn, mine might go one place, and yours, because of your different experiences, or maybe you are coming at things from another culture where colors have different connotation, might go somewhere else. And that's where I think we can use tools like that smartly and with specific prompts to say, I am going to be presenting to a European audience who's primarily from this country, and tell me, given this context, what you see or what I might consider, because then you can more easily bring in perspectives that are different from your own. I think I don't want to advocate outsourcing our brain though to AI, because I think as you can use it as a brainstorming partner and learn from this, then you can internalize some of those learnings so that you're developing your skill and having a sense of how to do things without always needing to check with the artificial intelligence. I don't know. I'm scared that we lose the skills and the foundational knowledge as people start outsourcing more and more to AI. So just.
This would require a dedicated webinar to talk about this big topic. I'm actually an optimistic, so I believe that if used wisely, it could complement us very well. I already see we have plenty of questions in the chat. I'm going to take them in a second, but first there is one question that really I wanted to ask, which is something that I loved in the book, same chart, different stories. You demonstrate in the book, and this is, I think, a very powerful concept. You demonstrate in the book that sometimes we might have a chart from which we start the conversation, but then depending on how we design the chart, on which areas we highlight, on which areas we want the eyes to be drawn to, we can tell different stories. And this is, in my opinion, a very powerful concept because it demonstrates how important, how relevant design is, how powerful design is, but as well as how the storytelling of the data can make a huge difference. So I would love to listen something on this.
Yeah. So this again for me comes down to audience, where a lot of times when we're communicating with data, it's not just one audience we want to communicate to. There might be several different audiences or a mixed group, each of whom is going to care about different things. So I'm actually I was just flipping through, I've got the book in front of me as well, because I didn't prep the visuals for this, but I'm going to look at chapter 17. And actually, just to give folks a sense of the structure of the book, it's organized in 20 case studies. So each chapter starts off with the original client-inspired but anonymized example, and then takes you through the thought process of what did we look at? Why did we look at it that way? What are the iterations? So we show all of the nuts and bolts behind the scenes that get you then to the eventual after, right? The way that we landed on communicating that one in the given instance, given the constraints from the client or the situation, and making assumptions along the way. So it becomes this really interesting method of teaching through example, which is what we do in our workshops and what we were trying to bring across to everyone in the book. So chapter 17, this is one that my colleague Mike wrote. It's called Find the Right Level of Detail. And the data that's being analyzed is customer service calls. So they're super messy. They start off with this like crazy, sorry, Maurizio's got it there too, awesome, up and down, like lots going on. And so he goes through this process of aggregating by different amounts. So you aggregate too little and you get this crazy up and down that's hard to make sense of. You aggregate too much and you lose some of the interesting things that are happening. And he realized along the way that there were a number of different stories you could tell, different areas of focus, depending on who your audience is. So for example, with customer service calls, you may have a manager who's looking to schedule, or you might have an HR person who's wanting to set up policies and procedures based on this data, or you may have your IT team who's interested in outages and how to detect and understand those. And so in this case, Mike takes the same graph, but uses different words, uses different emphasis, maybe even aggregates it slightly differently to tell each of those stories. So this is probably a little hard to see here, but the first one has the main curve, which is bimodal. He highlights the areas where the call volume is the largest. And the takeaway is call volume's heaviest during lunch hour and the mid-afternoon. And so the recommendation he makes off of this is encourage managers to schedule lunch breaks or small team meetings during the time between these two peaks. We have a little more give. The next one would be maybe for an HR kind of audience who's setting policies, where he actually shows a different curve by the day of the week. And then you note that Friday has the lower call volume than elsewhere. And so you might recommend having people take their time off or having team offsite sort of things on Fridays so that it impacts service levels the least. And then he has a different one that he goes through for the IT team, because it turns out there was this anomaly that he digs into, and there was the dialer kind of broke, or it didn't break, but it was assigning the same call time to a bunch of different calls. And so you get these crazy spikes that in some instances you might want to just smooth out. But when it comes to communicating to IT, that's the part that you actually want to emphasize. So again, through words and some annotation, I apologize, I should have had this one ready to go on the slide.
No worries, I'm sharing some of the charts.
Sense.
I'm sharing some pictures
Oh,
in the
perfect.
chat
I see
while
that.
you're
Okay,
talking,
that's awesome.
so that people could follow.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, so it's an example, again, of really thinking about our audience or our audiences and how we might communicate with them. I know I saw one question come up that was about what do you do when you've got highly technical and non-technical? How do you do both of those things at the same time? And doing them at the same time is hard because you have different people with different needs. And so I would say if if the thing you want to communicate, if it's sufficiently important and your audience's needs are sufficiently different, there can be times where it makes sense to break things into totally different communications, where you might have one version for your technical people and a totally different version for the non-technical. We encountered this at Google frequently, because internally our main two audiences were engineers on the one side and salespeople on the other. Two totally different types of people, as it turns out. The engineers had this almost insatiable desire for detail. They wanted to dig into our methodologies. They wanted to make sure that they were on board and agreed with everything. Whereas the salespeople could care less about any of the stuff that happened behind the scenes. They just wanted to know, what do I need to know? What does that mean I need to do? Let me get back to making money for the business. And when you think about it, and it was really after only trying to communicate to both of these audiences simultaneously a few times and failing, like, so we weren't meeting either of their needs by trying to come up with something that was meeting everybody's, that we realized we have to approach this differently. What we ended up doing was the engineers, we would get them involved sometimes as early as when we were designing the analysis, so that we knew we had people bought in, so they weren't going to reject things by the time we got to the end. Whereas the salespeople, they didn't care about that part. So we could wait until we had something specific that we needed them to do, and not communicate and waste their time the rest of the time. This is just an illustration of when you find yourself faced with a mixed audience and you're trying to meet the needs of everyone, just be aware that sometimes that means you don't meet anyone's needs. And so think about whether and when approaching things totally differently for different audiences might help everybody. And now it's more work, so you want to save this for when it's something critical. But that additional time spent, if it means you're able to get your information across and get other people to understand and act in the way that you need them to, that time is well spent.
Every audience deserves a dedicated presentation and a specific way of communicating to them. Every audience has different needs. I recently, it happened to me, true story. I was supporting an hotel company to work with data. And I remember one of the coolest observation was that they had this huge table with plenty of economics that they used to share periodically with their CFO and CFO team. And they were asking me, Maurizio, how can we improve it? Because it's written very small. It was like a big table with small numbers. And I said, how can we improve the communication, the story of all of this? But then what happened, we tried different approaches, but what really caught my attention was when they connected. I really wanted to see how this connected with the audience. And when I saw the audience, the CFO and the CFO teams was used to this table. They've been using this table for the last 20 years. So the moment the CFO was looking at this table, he knew exactly where to look. And that's why he was requesting this specific table, the same table, for all the countries in different regions in the group. And so, yeah, the table, if you look at, this was something that made me question myself, right? Because if I look at that table from, let's say, a data visualization or a data storytelling point of view, I would say, I would never present something like that. But in that specific context, to that specific audience, that table worked perfectly.
Yes. Well, and touches again on the curse of knowledge, right? And the familiarity that had been built by that exec. So that was what worked for them. And I will say that's one reason that anytime, and if you're looking at changing the way that that your team or that yourself that you communicate, doing it for new projects can sometimes be easier than trying to take something that's already entrenched. The monthly report that's been that way for years, don't start there, because people, just a fundamental principle of people is we dislike change. It makes us uncomfortable. And so as soon as you try to take something away, people grasp harder at that. So one one thing to do if you want to try to start implementing some of the tips that we've talked about here today, or some of the things that you see in the books, is when you're faced with a new project or something in a new space, try things there first, because you get less of that entrenched desire to want to hold on to things. And being smart about when and how you use some of these things. Like when we do a workshop, or when you see some of the examples that we do, sometimes people say, oh, well, I want to redo everything that I've ever touched now, which is not what you want to do, right? Things have ended up how they are for specific reasons. So being really smart about where you focus your time and effort, really paying attention to what little changes can I make that are going to have the biggest impact. And so we saw contrast through the examples that we looked at before. Words are another way to make sure your audience is going to interpret things correctly, and hopefully see the same things that you do. I think sometimes people think, oh, I'm communicating with data, it should all be numbers and pictures. But words play a very important role in making those numbers and pictures accessible to other people. So making sure you're titling well, labeling, adding annotations or context as needed to help other people make sense of what you're showing.
There is a very very interesting part of the book in which you talk about how combining pictures, words, and data together make a huge difference. And there is something that remained that I think it's quite memorable, in which you say, as Napoleon Bonaparte said, a good sketch is better than a long speech. Then you also say whether it doesn't have, or it has murky origins, but there is this saying that we used to repeat every now and then, which is a picture is worth 1,000 words. And then you say,
but if they say the same different words to everybody who looks at them, then that's not what we want, right?
Yes, exactly.
Here, we can look at an example to see this. And so here's where the curse of knowledge can come in hugely, because if I'm the one who made this graph, I know exactly what I'm looking at. But for anyone else, you've got no idea. And so you're left to make assumptions, right? We don't know what these lines mean. We don't know, is higher good? Is it bad? But as we start to put words around it, we can make it make sense. And so titling, labeling, right? If people should feel a certain way about the information, make that clear. And these little steps, they don't take a lot of time, right? Adding words doesn't even really take any design skills. You just want to make sure that you are providing something that's going to be sensible to someone else. And words are a great way to do that.
Which is very interesting in my opinion, because very often they believe that when we talk about data visualization, storytelling with data, we're just going to put charts on our presentation, but it is not true. And it's oftentimes the combination of what I loved you said, the small edits, or small modifications that can make a huge difference to the specific audience in a specific context. And there is one more thing that I believe is very interesting, and I'm going to pick the second question from Manikandan in the chat, because this inspires me. He says, when stakeholders focus only on numbers and not the story, how do you redirect the conversation towards decisions, right? So this is a very interesting point in my opinion, because I think there is very often a misunderstanding or a lot of resistance when we talk about storytelling in the world of data. When I face finance people or sales people who are highly data driven in their decisions, in their communication, and I tell them, guys, what I think this presentation is missing is a story. And then people oftentimes they come to me and they say, Maurizio, you know what? It's a P&L. Which story do you want it to say or to tell, right?
Well, and I think sometimes story has a bad connotation of people feel like you're trying to mislead in some
Yeah.
way. But biases come in throughout the process, right? Biases, we're biasing the information that we're showing when we choose what information to collect in the first place, or how to show it, or all of these different things. So when we are telling a story with data, it's not in an attempt to mislead or to bias, but in a way that allows us to connect with our audience and lead them to understanding and action. Because I think sometimes people will say, well, I just want the numbers. I want the unbiased numbers, which the problem then is you end up with graphs or slides that look like this, right? All right, then I'll shove all the numbers onto a slide and do with it what you will. And this is where I think you get into all the conversations about the data, or what kind of graph was chosen, or what the axis represents, because the thing that's missing is story. It's that thing that you can connect with that helps you understand what's going on. When we just show data without story, it's really easy for our audience to just keep asking questions, and maybe we even walk away with requests for more data. And that's because we're not satisfying the so what? Why am I looking at this? What does it mean? If you're working with data, that is your job, is to tell other people, what does it mean? And you may not know everything, you might not have all of the context, but by driving people towards something reasonable based on what you do know, you can get them to focus on the right thing, right? What do we do now with this new understanding of the data? So just the example I flashed up, this is another one from the book, right? If you're asked to put everything on a slide and show data, it might look like this. But if we take the time to step back and think about our audience and what it means and connect the pieces together, use words and contrast sparingly, we can get to something that not only delivers the data, but also drives the right sort of conversations. And that's where I think we have the ability to help people derive so much greater value out of a lot of the great work that's already being done. And it's by applying a lot of the tips that you and I have talked about here today, applying the lessons in the book and elsewhere.
Yeah, I think the one of the most common false belief is that when we talk about storytelling, people expect us to just tell a joke or tell a simple story or simplify the data in a way that, of course, wouldn't fit the context. But I believe that when we talk about story, what we mean is truly the finding the right narrative to tell information in a way that actually concretely resonates to the audience. Now, I won't lie, but I have like 1,000 of other questions in my notes.
I knew we were going to get there.
And we have no more time. We're running out of time because we schedule our webinar for 1 hour. So I would come to the conclusion, Cole, if you agree with me. And I know the audience probably have plenty of other questions. Maybe we'll do a second round. Let's see in the future. But for sure, I just wanted to ask you one last question. What would be your best recommendations for our audience today when they will face their next chart?
So I think the next time you find yourself needing to make a graph or a slide to communicate to someone else, pause and consider your audience. Who are they? What do you know about them? How can you make things work for them? And then apply some of the things that we've talked about today. Think about how you can use color sparingly to direct your audience where to look, and how you can use words, either directly on the graph or slide, as we've seen in some of the examples, or through your spoken narrative to make it clear what you want your audience to see and why you want them to see it. If you do those two things, your next presentation is already going to be better than the one before it.
Thank you very much for sharing, Cole. I see we have, one last question from Manikandan. let me take it, and then I will call Laura back for the conclusion. Last question. If possible, with an AI increasingly automating analysis and reporting, which human skills such as data storytelling and critical thinking do you believe will become even more valuable? And how should analysts start developing them now to stay relevant? I have you, Cole, to go first if you like, and then I'll give my thoughts. I share my thoughts.
I think as AI increases and we start using it in increasing places, there is going to be more than ever a desire to connect to another person. And so absolutely the skill I would recommend developing is your ability to communicate as yourself, talking, because AI isn't going to be able to do that in the near future. We can bring the voice to our data and connect with other people in a way that can help us build that understanding and take the context into account and really humanize the data. And it's those human elements that are going to become sacred, I think, in this next phase.
Yeah, I believe, guys, we need to be very clear on one fact. Redesigning slides doesn't equal making a presentation effective. Okay, it's connecting with people. A handshake has never been so valuable, in my opinion, as it is becoming nowadays with AI, right? A presentation means being there for them, for your audience, means listening to what is not said. Okay, means reading your audience, understanding the situation, sometimes working off script because the situation requires you to do so, and being present and react with real context, and being able to be human in front of people, because at the end of the day, we're trying to drive decision making, and to drive decision making, we need to build trust, and that's why we use data ultimately. So guys, if we want to build trust, I know I would ask ChatGPT, Copilot, Anthrop, Claude, whatever, to review my charts or to review the analysis of my doctor, but finally I want to go to the doctor and ask him or her for the final decision, right? So AI is a powerful tool, but watch out, because I agree with Cole 100%. Our communication skills, our way of connecting with people, our empathy, our adaptive listening are core skills, and they are becoming more important than ever. So thank you very much for sharing, Cole. I think this question was very interesting. Okay, so thank you very much, Cole, for being with us today. I'm going to call Laura back for the conclusion. She's going to share. Ciao, Laura. She's going to share the resources with you guys. Cole has already shared the link where you can find all the resources about Cole's book, and we aggregated Cole's resources with our resources behind the QR code. So if you like, just scan it and get all the resources. You will find our guides. You will find the books from Cole, Cole's website, Storytelling with Data. My recommendation is go and download everything that you can download and start studying, because you will find plenty of knowledge that we guys shared, and of course feel free to reach out if you have any questions you want to share, or any thoughts you want to share about this webinar. Tag us on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to contribute to the communication to answer. Cole, thank you very much for your time. It has been a pleasure. Again, I have tons of other questions, because I've read not just the last book, but all of your books. I started with Storytelling with Data many years ago. I read also the book about storytelling, one of the most recent ones. This latest one, when it came out, I thought I must have it. And what I really love about it is the fact that you explain things step by step. So you see, you show the slide that doesn't work, then you tell us why it doesn't work, then you make small changes, and the reader's brain starts seeing things that we didn't see before. This approach is something that is so easy. I mean, you read it, it's a book about data, but you read it so easily. It's like reading a novel, and I truly love it. So thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
And guys, thank you very much for participating to the call. We're going to close it, so over to Laura.
Thank you. I would like to thank you both, guys. It was so practical, and I was about to ask one main suggestions, but you did first, Maurizio, so thank you very much. And guys, let me know if the QR code works well and you receive all the resources direct in your inbox. And I think that's it. Thank you very much again.